All right, 132, folks. I want to talk about more about Unit 3 here. I want to talk about Chapter 20. Here's the key. With Chapter 20, you want to remember two main terms. One is progressivism, the other is populism. Progressivism is about actions taken within the city. It's about the more populous places, the more urban places, and it's taken mostly by the middle class people. And we're developing a huge middle class at this particular point. And the idea is the middle class is looking around and saying, listen, there's a lot of things going on that aren't right. There's a fabulously wealthy people, and there's incredibly poor, poverty-stricken people, and then there's us. And there has to be a better meeting ground. There has to be a better way of doing things. And so the progressive movement is about creating change. It's about creating change. Versus populism. Populism is going to be about implementing some change for the agrarian sector. Populism is going to be about the farmers regaining their power, regaining their market, regaining their economy, regaining the power of the agrarian population to go ahead and create some change for themselves. But this is progressivism. And so what we have is with the Industrial Revolution, we have a lot of change. That there is a huge growing wealth gap, and that there are the people that are workers, there are the people that are managers, and the people that are the owners. And the people that are owners, well, they're slowly moving away from the cities. They're slowly moving away from the factories and living other places. And so the heart of the cities are becoming downtrodden husks. They're becoming places that no one wants to live. But unfortunately for the worker bees is they can't afford to live someplace else. And so we're looking at a huge growing disparity as far as living conditions, as far as working conditions, as far as earning conditions along the way. And progressivism is about creating change. If you're a progressive, you've got three main goals. You want to investigate, you want to educate, you want to legislate. It's about the birth of the idea of the social sciences, about psychology, about psychiatry, about sociology, and reaching out and lifting up and helping those people. At first, Theodore Roosevelt is not all about populist movement. He feels like there's a group of people called the muckrakers. If you don't know anything about horses, horses live in stalls. Horses have hay and other things in their stalls, and well, the hay is about bedding, but of course, since horses don't actually have a flush toilet, there is a whole lot of how do I phrase this nicely? Oh, horse shit in the stalls, and so the person that goes in and pulls this out is called mucking the stable, so raking out all that crap that's in there. And so what is going to happen is you're going to have a variety of people like Ida Tarbell, who is going to write an article, and she's going to write articles about, well, in a magazine called McClure, about certain corporations. You're going to have Upton Sinclair writing books called The Jungle. You're going to have these people that are indeed activists who are going to be writing about these things. Jacob Risk is going to be a photojournalist. He's going to create a book called How the Other Half Lives. And what they're doing is they're exposing the living conditions. They're exposing the cheating, the financing, the double dealing, and the standards around these huge corporations. They're trotting out their dirty laundry for people to see exactly what's happening. And so, where Teddy Roosevelt is a pretty wealthy guy, he's got a lot of friends in corporations. At first, he's like, oh man, they're just creating this agenda. They're just muckraking. They're just pulling out all this stuff, and they're blowing stuff out of proportion. But the more he finds out as president, he goes, man, maybe they're right. Maybe we need some change. And so he's going to help push that change along the way, and he's going to be a major progressivist along the way. But not only does this have to deal with that, but we're going to talk a little bit about changes in government as well, and changes in rights and work conditions. So there's a lot of stuff going on with the progressive movement that reaches into a lot of areas. So I want you to be aware of that. One of the first things is going to be something called the social gospel. Here's the idea. You're all familiar with the social gospel. You just don't realize it. The social gospel is this. It's the idea that churches should start their missionary work here and not in foreign places, that they should be reaching out to their friends, their families, their neighbors, and their neighbors' neighbors, the ones that aren't necessarily members of the church, but the ones that need to be lifted up, the ones that need to be saved, the ones that need to be ministered, perhaps aren't in a foreign country, perhaps they're here in that downtrodden neighborhood. And so we're going to look at the introduction of things called the YMCA, Young Men's Christian Association, the YWCA, the Young Women's Christian Association. We're going to look at the Salvation Army. You're going to look at these people because they're going to reach into the neighborhoods. They're going to reach into the slums. They're going to reach into these areas that are downtrodden, that need to be lifted up. And they're going to reach out both a financial as well as a Christian hand and a biblical hand. And the idea is they're trying to have Christian intervention in what is hugely a social crisis. You're also going to be looking at something called a settlement house. And I want you to remember the settlement house because we've already been talking about them a little bit. And it's going to be a new breed of women, of educated women, college women, learned women, who are going to say, my goodness, we can't stand out here and watch this happen. We need to go do something about it. So you look at people like Jane Addams and Whole House, who is literally going to get funding to go down to the neighborhood and buy a house and renovate a house and live in that house and minister to the neighborhood, not from outside, because you can't change from outside. She's going to live in the neighborhood with the people, learn the culture, learn the system, and introduce to them some certain ideas like, well, listen, this is how you clean. Okay, this is how you maintain sanitation. This is how you maintain better health. This is how you maintain a better diet based on all that stuff. This is how you lift things up and live better from within. And she teaches them, not tells them, but teaches them as one of them how that they can create change and better living conditions. This is huge. If you've ever done missionary work, you know that flying down someplace for a week and then doing your work and then leaving only creates so much change. And so what she does is she establishes a full-time ministry, and she's one of several women in several houses that does this. But it's this social gospel for change that is a huge part of what's happening. It creates the opportunity to make other changes, but also because she is down there, she can also advocate. And she is indeed going to advocate for the causes of these people, of these things that need to be helped, that need to be lifted up. She is also going to be a major actor, because what we're going to start looking at is we're going to start looking at where we got abolition, where we got the elimination of slavery. There was another major movement that was tied in with that, and that was the women's right to vote. The women's right to what we call suffrage or enfranchisement, that once the vote was over for slavery, that the cause of women's suffrage kind of fell to the wayside. And so this is actually going to go back to enabling that movement. And what we're going to see is a huge growth in that particular movement at this particular time. And so you have to make sure that you keep that as part of the agenda out there, because this enablement of women is part of that. So what I want to do is I want to talk about the women's suffrage movement, but I also want to talk about some changes in voting and changes in politics to go along with that. So I'm going to cut this off here and pick it up in part 2.